Get it rolling. Good afternoon, and welcome to the third webinar of a four-part series brought to you by NUMOA and NERC as part of an EPA-funded project focused on anaerobic digestion, regulation, and environmental justice. This project is meant to support state and local government programs that seek to use anaerobic digestion to increase their food waste diversion rates while addressing environmental justice concerns. This project has developed guidance and training on environmental justice engagement and regulatory compliance. 3 published materials have just been released and can be found on the NUMOA website under Publications and Resources, and on the NERC website as well. The 3 published materials are the Regulatory Guide, the Community Engagement Guide, and the What's AD and How Can I Get Involved roadmap. This webinar is focused on anaerobic digestion facilities, operators' perspectives on siting, and more. I'm John Fay, a project manager at the Northeast Waste Management Officials Association, or NUMOA. And before we get started, I'd like to review some housekeeping details. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. A recording of the webinar and a copy of the presentations will be available on the NERC and NUMOA websites, and you will receive an email with a link in the coming days or weeks. Please keep your microphone on mute during the recording. Please use the chat to ask any questions for the presenters, which we'll get to once everyone is finished speaking. You'll find the chat in the menu along the bottom of your screen. Just place your questions in there and we will triage them at the end. After the webinar, you will receive a brief survey. Please, if you could, complete this. It helps us assess the impact of the event. So today we have 3 great presenters this afternoon. Holden Cookson, Director of Business Development at AgriCycle Energy in Exeter, Maine. Brian Paganini, Vice President of Quantum Biopower in Southington, Connecticut. And Andrew Casserly, Vice President of Government Relations at Bioenergy DevCo and their new plant in Jessup, Maryland. And so, without further ado, let's begin with Holden Cookson of AgriCycle. Holden, if you could share your screen and let's get rolling.
Sure. Yeah, thanks so much for the intro, and thanks to everybody who's carving out time to be here today. So my name is Holden Cookson. I'm the Director of Business Development for AgriCycle Energy. We are the sister company to Exeter Agri Energy, which is the AgriCycle is the hauling side, and Exeter Agri Energy is the digestion and disposal side. Here's a quick rundown of what I will be covering today. And John, can you remind me my time just so I can track it? I don't want to go over and impose.
Yeah, so 15 or 20 minutes. So till 1:20 or 1:25 is fine.
Okay. Yeah, great. You know, a lot of times when I do these presentations, I try not to make it too like preaching to the choir. So I might skip over some of the impact of food waste content that may be recurring topics for the type of folks who are carving out, you know, an hour plus to learn about food waste niche topics. So might skip over a few things here and there. I'm going to summarize what AgriCycle does in really broad, high-level terms. I'm going to talk about EAE, Exeter Agri Energy, and AgriCycle metrics, some of those impacts, offsets, etc. I'm going to talk about how the operation works for AgriCycle, how and why food is wasted. Again, some of those might be some recurring themes there. Hopefully, you maybe learn a thing or two, or have a topic that you can bring in and incorporate into your dialogue day to day on the topic. The food waste scale and highest use, how that is incorporated into our ethos and our operation, and then general program details and how that relates to social justice and how they're intertwined. And then one of my favorite comments or favorite quotes, we do this not because it is easy, but because we thought it would be easy. I'm sure anybody in the food waste world can relate to that. So impacts of food waste, I think a lot of times we talk strictly about methane, and within the framework of highest use, social justice, food waste scale, hierarchy, I always start the top impact of food waste being hungry people. Water and land use is also typically forgotten. We usually think in just frames of greenhouse gases, so I like to mention that. For folks who might be new to the conversation and food waste in general, landfilling food waste produces methane, which is 40 times plus. That metric varies depending on where you find it, compared to CO2 in terms of how it traps greenhouse gases and causes greenhouse gas effect. So how does it work? How does AgriCycle work? How do we intertwine with EIE? Essentially, we collect food waste, and that is all types of food waste, whether it's solids, liquids, packaged, source separated, you name it. We take that food waste, I'll describe this in kind of layman's terms, but we create this really disgusting looking chocolate milkshake looking material, which is called slurry. And we agitate it, heat it up in these what look like giant hot tubs with covers, which you see behind me here. These are digesters. Those covers are not held up by anything besides gas, and that slurry is about 100 and probably get corrected on this, like 100 plus 117 degrees Fahrenheit, and all of the bacteria in there creates a gas. We generate electricity with that gas, and once the slurry has gone through its entire cycle, everything that's left over is called digestate. We grow crops with that digestate or fertilizer. So all of that takes place on at a number of different digesters throughout the region of the United States on behalf of us, but at our home digester, Exeter Agri Energy, we have the capacity to process about 80,000 tons of food waste annually. In terms of gallons capacity, again, the gallonage of those three giant domes in the background you see here, about 3 million gallons. We have about 1,000, and that varies between 1,000 and 2,500 heads of cattle, and have 3,500 acres worth of land. The digestate we produce from our digesters grows crops on those 3,500 acres, and we feed our dairy cows with those crops. The digester was created in 2011 before AgriCycle Energy, which was produced, started the year after, because in rural Maine, we're in the northern part of Maine, here right above the top left of the AgriCycle logo. We thought if we built it, they will come. Food waste will just arrive, and that wasn't the case. We needed to feed the digester. We found that we were relying on third-party logistics and other haulers for the vast majority of our material, so we decided to establish AgriCycle Energy. On a daily basis, we're collecting about 300 tons of food waste. In terms of totes tipped, which might be a familiar or unfamiliar term, depending on your exposure to the industry, but we've tipped about 1.3 million totes since between 2017 and today. Between 2017 and today, we've also hauled about 19 million gallons worth of liquid. And according to the EPA's WARM model, our annual offset is 3.4 million gallons worth of gasoline, and that's in terms of greenhouse gas creation, not energy. And we power about 4,500 homes annually. That's across our footprint. That's not just at Exeter. That's working with folks like Brian and Andrew and other digesters throughout the region. How we get the materials there, it varies based on the producer. So we've got our collection trucks, which are what collects those totes. Liquid tankers, so for anybody who's creating any kind of like liquid byproduct, those could be drink manufacturers, you name it. 53-foot box trailers, so if we work with a distribution center, or let's say a load gets rejected on its way to either a grocer or to a distribution center, and the entire thing has to go in the case of a recall, you name it, we'll get that to our facilities. And then we also have live load trailers and roll-off containers for those kind of, again, bulk volumes that, if you put them in totes, you'd have 150 of them. It doesn't make sense. Let's just send a giant container over. And talking about our relationship with Brian and Andrew and a number of other sites, these are where the majority of our material is going, those red dots currently. And as contracts either renew or expand, we anticipate working with sites, those white dots down the rest of the mid-Atlantic. And it really couldn't be done without them. I mean, there's no way that we could environmentally or ethically get food waste from, let's say, like Virginia or Pennsylvania to Exeter. It just doesn't make sense. Luckily, we have great folks throughout the region who have similar guidelines, parameters to us, and we're able to dispatch the same signage, information, resources across the board, no matter where we are, because we're all like-minded and have similar infrastructure, and it makes our job a lot easier. So this is one of those topics that, again, I will probably glance over pretty quickly, but this is where food waste is generally coming from: residential, restaurants, grocers, institutions, processors, or manufacturers. And it is produced from those various producers for a number of different reasons, but these are the major reasons that we've kind of identified as a people or as a culture. So consumer psychology, labeling, serving styles. So think about like buffet tray usage versus using a single plate, transportation laws, getting things to and from, shelf management, etc. So when AgriCycle approaches a new client, obviously our core service is that we're going to take food waste from their facility, their site, their store, their brewery, whatever they're doing, to an anaerobic digestion facility or a composting facility if it is the right type of material. For example, coffee grounds. We get a lot of coffee grounds or shells. Those are not great fits for AD, but we'll still utilize that hauling infrastructure and bring it to a sustainable outlet aside from a landfill. Bring it to a composting facility, whether we own it or we find somebody who wants the material somewhere locally. But a huge emphasis of ours and an obligation, which I'll get into in a second, is positioning ourselves as a safety net for higher use, being prevention, reduction, donation, animal feed, you name it. The unfortunate reality is there is enough to go around. As you saw in one of my early slides, we collect about 300 tons daily. And that's even with our programs being intentionally designed to highlight the importance of the hierarchy and the food waste scale. So in terms of acceptability, we can accept all food waste, whether it's packaged or separated, like I mentioned, and that is department or area, is not specific to a department or area. So if we're thinking in terms of like a grocery store, for example, we can take dairy products from the dairy aisle, we can take meat products, we can take bread, and the way that we portray that is we will make sure we're working with the leadership of that company and we're dispatching information around reduction, getting ingrained in their processes to ensure that, again, we are positioned as a safety net for higher use. And that allows us to create in addition to the savings compared to landfill, a savings even compared to our own service when they can bring food waste or what could be food waste if they didn't have an outlet to a place like donations or church or local organizations, what have you. We're also doing proactive program maintenance, so checking in on those metrics and then triggering outreach proactively based on what we see. A lot of times that'll be incorporated into as like a scorecard or quarterly surveys. And we're also able to build in some of those metrics, analytics, KPIs, if you will, around donations and reduction if we're given access to that data. Going back to what I had mentioned about standardization, making sure that regardless of where we are, the information, resources, signage, education, etc., is synonymous, really comes down to folks like Brian and Andrew and their facilities, who have similar infrastructure to us and are aligned ethically and then operationally as well. Each type of facility will get a specific SOP, or standard operating procedure, and that breaks down step by step how they get serviced, when they get serviced, and the guidelines might vary a little bit, but what does not vary at all is our signage and resources. It needs to be easily accessible, it needs to have QR codes, it needs to be redundant, it needs to be able to be updated, and it needs to be in multiple languages. Our containers are also pretty unanimous regardless of facility. Those will either be cubic yard boxes for those 53-foot box trailers that we were talking about earlier, or totes. Reporting, again, it'll be either weights, estimates, and then we'll do reporting based on those. This is kind of the pathway of onboarding. So we're making sure we're presenting to key leadership, ensuring that they're all on board, that it is a top-down approach. The onboarding packets and SOPs are created and then distributed back to them, ensuring that we're incorporating factors of donation, reduction, loss prevention, refrigeration, bulk loss management. That could be in case of a power outage, that could be from a recall, and highlighting other cost savings of our program, not just the cost savings of compared to landfill, especially in New England where the T&D rates or the disposal rates are quite high. But how else we can get ingrained to produce savings and help defend sustainability practices that is oftentimes looked as as secondary to an operation. We really want to highlight the importance fiscally as well as environmentally to ensure that there's longevity in these types of programs. We'll be talking about that. I think it's in April. I don't have the date off the top of my head with NMOA, which if you want to register to that event, I have it at the end of my slideshow here, which I'd suggest giving that a scan. Going, again, harping on the value adds beyond just, the toter work. Obviously, there's food waste recycling, which is our base core practice, but making sure we're talking about and ingrained in the reduction and donation support. That means every client of ours gets access to a database of resources. This also includes a donation network and a network of a plethora of folks who can help support them in their various industries. Participation tracking, do that proactive outreach. We can go upstream or downstream of them, either to a distribution center or even work with the donations that a client may work with, a donation bank. Large volume support due to recall or power outage. And then we can consolidate their vendorship due to our expansive acceptabilities list. We really do feel like we have an obligation to promote these higher pathways. It's emphasized in our onboarding. It's integrated into all of our communication. We ensure that the data and analytics of our own is able to be matched, compared, and contextualized with higher use. The resources for reduction and donations are quite vast, and it's important that we're highlighting and constantly updating that donation network. As we know, it always changes. Signage that we produce needs to be multilingual, and there needs to be education materials outside of just how to do the program correctly. So that could be education materials around policies that are coming out. That could be education materials on compostable ware and various other sustainability topics. We're also ensuring that we're heavily involved with policy enactment and support. So those could be food waste bans, that could be labeling, and then grant fund co-signing for other AD developments or food waste best practices, education, outreach, marketing. And then we're also helping folks navigate difficult topics like consumer virtuism, compostable ware, dumpster diving, geopolitics. We're working in some of the most rural areas of New England and the Mid-Atlantic. So overcoming some of those challenges is essential to the success of food waste diversion. And like I promised, the NUMOA registration, where we're going to talk about cost savings within food waste diversion programs, how to highlight that and go away from that conversation with some hands-on, tangible practices and tools to prove that cost savings. If you want to contact AgriCycle, the QR code on the left is for that. And then if you want to contact me directly, the QR code in the middle is to my LinkedIn. And that's the presentation. Made sure to hit that 15-minute mark, but came a little bit short. So thanks for your patience if I went over.
No, that was perfect. Thank you, Holden.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And the conference is actually NERC's conference. I know we often we work together so much, but so that scan will be available on the presentations when we send them out at the end. Also, I put the link to that conference that you'll be speaking at in the chat as well. Great. And for participants, please, if you have questions for Holden, just put them right in the chat and we will get to those at the end. So next up is Brian Paganini. If you could, oh, there we go. Perfect. Take it away, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Holden.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Holden, for the great segue. So, my name is Brian Paganini. I'm the Vice President of Quanta Biopower. Deeply grateful to be part of this conversation today for NUMOA and obviously our friends at NERC. I think it's a very important conversation. It sounds like some previous series webinars were focused on citing environmental justice considerations for these facilities, and I think we'll be prepared to talk about a little bit on what Holden brought up in terms of good food diversion, digestion, but also, what siting considerations look like for facilities like this, because it certainly is not trivial. And I'm sure my colleagues on this webinar can speak to that as well. So Quanta Biopower was founded in 2014 and is part of a larger business called the Supreme Industries Group. The business historically has been a land clearing and right-of-way access business. And back about 2 decades ago, ownership and the entrepreneurial mindset of the business was to start to turn beneficial reusable materials in the form of woody biomass and clean wood waste into things of value, such as compost and soils and bark mulches. So this is our campus in Southington, Connecticut. We've occupied this campus for about a decade. In 2011, if you came to this site, it was virtually a patch of dirt. Southington is located basically in the center of the state. Wonderful access to Interstate 84 and gives us good access down through the New York City corridor and up north through the Boston corridor. And really the way we think about this campus is through the lens of an organics recycling campus. And the way we define organic waste is both food waste and clean wood waste. And as all of us are most likely aware on this call, organic waste makes up roughly 35 to 40% of the waste shed, particularly in Connecticut. When we think about the issues that states like Connecticut are facing, particularly states like Connecticut, who've mostly been dependent upon incineration of trash or railing waste tons out of the state into other neighboring states for landfill deposit. So this facility in Southington certainly is a component of critical infrastructure that really strikes at the fraction of the waste shed that can be diverted and can be recycled. So it serves a multitude of functions. As you can see, the anaerobic digester is in the southern boundary of the campus to the left of the screen. And the remainder of the campus is our volume reduction facility, which takes in clean wood waste at the northern part of the campus, processes that, and turns those materials into clean wood waste. We also have on-site composting, which is in the northern part of the campus. That's a traditional windrow compost facility, which takes in a variety of materials and composts them throughout the season. So the process in feedstocks is pretty much similar across the two businesses. Generally speaking, we're taking in waste streams, again, in the form of food waste, which in our world, we do have a depackaging facility on our campus. So that food waste takes the shape of post-consumer or pre-consumer food waste streams, material that comes in a package, in a bottle, in a can, in a box. We recover the packaging from those waste streams and then send those materials back out to the recycling marketplace as viable and clean recycled product, which is really important for customers that are looking for a solution to not only just recycle food scraps, but also recycling the packaging when it's able to be recycled in a manner consistent with their sustainability goals. The amount of wood waste we take in on the campus is roughly 200,000 cubic yards a year of woody biomass. Most of that is in the form of stumps, brush, leaves, grass clippings, clean pallets, and we process that through a stationary grinding system that recovers the majority of the material through a series of grinding and screening apparatuses, and then produces a very well homogenized bark mulch substrate that then gets pushed back into the marketplace. In that side of the business, we roughly have about 7,000 customers that we're marketing materials to. The quantum side of the business, about 40,000 tons of food waste is our capacity, and most of those customers are within the general tri-state of the Northeast. You know, it's no secret what we do on campus. This is, we're either applying a sophisticated widget like an anaerobic digester or other mechanized equipment, plus our know-how and manpower to process these materials and turn them into materials of value. Again, soils, bark mulch, compost. The gas we derive from the anaerobic digester is used to power a combined heat and power system, which is making both electricity and hot water. And we're sending either molecules of energy or electrons of energy or material back out the front door to partners like our utility, who is Eversource, folks like Scott's Fertilizer, our partner at Walmart, and folks like Agway, who are really seeking products that are more naturally amended versus traditional synthetic fertilizers to augment a growing need in the marketplace for more naturally organic driven nutrients that come in a bag, that come in a soil form that a lot of customers and clients are seeking. Specific to the anaerobic digester, this digester was constructed in 2015. It came on the heels of a pretty substantial amount of diligence with myself and other members of our team traveling throughout Europe to places like Germany, Switzerland, Northern Italy, the UK, Denmark, and really being fully immersed in robust digester technologies to really understand how these facilities work and operate within a regulated state like the state of Connecticut that prides itself on having, you know, good, strong environmental standards. And we wanted to make sure we were going to bring a project and bring a technology to the state that was amenable to those regulations, but also amenable to a customer base where at the time really we weren't fully convinced or convicted around the types and volumes of food waste that we would be coming down the street into our front door. So really the design basis for this plant was to be able to process a wide variety of food waste, pre-treat those food waste streams, creating that story that Holden mentioned early on, but also to make sure that we could digest those materials in a robust treatment system. So thankfully, we had a very welcome town manager here in the town of Southington that welcomed this sort of process and technology. And we ultimately decided to settle on a two-stage thermophilic reactor, which in our world and you know what I'll call kind of digester nerd speak is just a very robustly built anaerobic digester to take varying calorific values of food waste and processing those in a very compact and small footprints. Our reactor operates at about 128 degrees Fahrenheit in the absence of oxygen. That's definitely obviously the principle of anaerobic digestion. And really the design predicate here was to create a compact facility capable of making good volumes of biogas, but also creating post-digester digestate materials that were suitable for finished composting and ready to be used in the marketplace to augment soils. On the balance, this facility is built for 40,000 tons per year of receiving throughput. It produces about 1.2 megawatts of power on an hourly basis, makes about 1 million BTUs of thermal energy every hour. We hold on to about 50% of that thermal value to reheat our facility, our tankage, reheat some accompanying buildings that are located on the campus. And on the yearly balance, we're avoiding roughly 5,000 tons of CO2 because of the methane that we're capturing through the process. We do take our residual materials in the form of dewatered solids and blend that with our compost or with our compost ingredients, making roughly 8,000 tons of compost on an annual basis. So that kind of gives you a sense on the efficiency of the facility. If 10 pounds of food waste goes into the digester, about 8.5 pounds of that food waste is volatilized into biogas, and about 1.5 pounds is turned into an ingredient that gets composted and blended with our other leaf yard waste sources on site. Looking at an aerial shot of the campus and to give you a sense of how our campus works and looks and acts, our wood waste recycling facility occupies the majority of the campus where we're taking and processing those stumps, brush, leaves, grass, and other materials into bark, mulch, and soils. The anaerobic digester is at the southern part of the campus. In this aerial shot, you can kind of get a sense where my cursor is, where our depackaging and pretreatment facility lives and operates. That's about a 25,000 square foot facility where we're receiving material that comes in on pallets, mostly from food manufacturers or food distributors that are just having materials that aren't really suitable for traditional pretreatment, that might need a little bit more what we call sort of blocking and tackling and hand-to-hand combat as far as material separation and recycling to be treated and made suitable into a slurry for the anaerobic digester process. And in the northern part of the campus, we're obviously operating our composting site where we're turning leaf and yard waste into residual byproducts that are then sold to the market. On a permitting basis, this is a Connecticut DEP volume reduction permit, so it is a solid waste facility, solid waste activity. It also has an air permit issued by the state of Connecticut. It has a litany of additional state and local permits in order to make it a conforming operation. I think early on, one of the keys to our success in this facility was the fact that we spent a lot of time educating the regulatory body, the state legislature, the executive branch of government, obviously our local stakeholders, on what our operation was going to look like and act like within a fairly citified area in the state of Connecticut. I think education is really key in order to give folks a level of comfort about how these processes look and work and act. We did spend a substantial amount of time also having public education sessions, general public hearings, and just letting folks know, hey, this is a process that is very deliberate. It's not by accident. If done right, it could be very additive to a local community and provide a lot of benefit just beyond the recycling means of recycling food scraps and wood waste. We've looked deeply into the secondary and tertiary benefit of facilities like this, particularly facilities like ours, or our facility in particular, and its impact on the community, and how our facility has helped to spur the advancement of other smaller hauling companies, other smaller composting businesses. We do run an internship program with our local universities, so we've helped to further and advance the issuance of academic, I would say, more curriculum relative to environmental engineering and things that are more additive to creating the operators of the future for facilities like ours. So it's been pretty impactful beyond just the basis of recycling food scraps. Not an easy permit to obtain, obviously in any state, particularly in states that in the Northeast. Took us about 2.5 years to get permitted, mostly because we were asking our regulatory body to really issue 3 permits in one: a solid waste permit, an air permit, and a wastewater permit. It took us 12 months to build this facility. We built this facility ourselves. We do have construction makeup to our business, and took us about 12 months to commission it. This facility has really 3 primary steps to it. It has a food waste pretreatment step, it has a biogas creation step, and it has a wastewater treatment step to it. So 3 very rigorous and defined processes, all very challenging to operate and separately, exponentially more challenging to operate altogether. Facility siting, I always like to talk about what it's like to site a facility like this, so folks can get a sense in their community what siting looks like. The average digester, and it depends on the scale of a digester, is plus or minus 5 acres of spatial need, including turnarounds and setbacks and things of that nature. It's a relatively compact footprint for our facility. So really, if you think about what we're doing in terms of biogas generation and the biogas train in our plant, really you're talking about less than an acre of what we call kind of punching power to generate 1.2 megawatts of power. So it's a pretty good compact footprint for a lot of environmental benefit. Largely, these facilities are all vertical construction. It's usually vertical steel tanks, plus vertical steel buildings that are erected, in a coordinated effort to make sure process flow is necessary for the way the facility needs to operate. And our facility is fairly inaudible from 100 feet away. I think the loudest part of our plant is our combined heat and power system, which if you're 30 feet away from it, you can barely hear it. So we do a lot of work around making sure it's quiet, and obviously making sure we're not offensive to our neighbors. So we do have a very robust air capture system, a negative air capture system in this plant to make sure we're capturing those fugitive air emissions and not letting them escape from the facility itself. Our facility takes in less than 30 trucks a day, probably I'd say on average 15 to 17 trucks per day. In busy times, maybe that's 20, but not your traditional solid waste facility taking a lot of volume of trucks. So there's a minimal impact as far as truck traffic. And I will say that, and I'm sure my colleagues would attest to this, it really comes down to about the operations team. Operations and operators are what separates, good operations from great facilities. And we do take a lot of deliberance and spend a great deal of time organizing, cleaning, and training at our facility. I think it's really critical, and I think it separates the operations throughout the United States that are successful and those that are not successful in this industry. It's really challenging to build facilities and get them permitted and sited. It's many factors more challenging to operate them and operate them well. So the ones that do it, obviously like AgriCycle and our friends at Biology DevCo, it's not easy to run these facilities. They're very challenging to run and operate. And it is all about the operations team. And here at Quantum, it's no exception. We've got a fantastic team of folks who are all very, I'll call them selfless and all want to see the goal achieved and the mission achieved here at Quantum. We're very deliberate about the way we produce our compost and our soils. A couple years ago, we affectionately started to market a NutriGrow brand, which really is a limited brand that gets circulated to folks in the local community. But we do take our digester residuals, which on the NPK balance is roughly 6, 2.5, and about 0.5% organic potassium. And those materials are blended with the materials that we generate on site, traditional leaf and yard waste compost and some other goodies, to really create that right bulk density and that mass balance within a compost situation. And that is finished cured over a period of time to generate a compost blend that we've studied extensively with a lot of our academic partners here in the state of Connecticut to make sure that we feel very convinced and convicted around the ability to demonstrate good plant vigor, good germination, good plant growth, good nutrient retention properties, as well as good soil hydration. Those are all the hallmarks of a good compost blend. And this is something we're very proud of. It took us about 4 years to get this part of our world right, and took us a lot of time to make sure that we validated those dynamics and make sure that we could stand by them with our customers. So what's on the horizon for us? I think there's a lot of things to be excited about in our industry. Obviously, setting aside the growing need and demand for more food diversion in our marketplace, I think what gets us very excited is the arrival of renewable natural gas as a transition fuel to lessen our demand on traditional fossil fuels. Obviously, renewable natural gas being derived from recycled food scraps versus trying to frack that gas out of a frack well in eastern Pennsylvania. This gas, obviously, in the carbon balance is more friendlier than traditional fossil fuels, and we see that as a nice transition fuel away from fossil fuels to a deeper level of electrification in our society. Another area that we're pretty excited about is the decarbonization of aviation fuel. We think that there's some exciting technology on the horizon, and we're partnered with folks at Yale and Pratt & Whitney to evaluate those technologies and see how we can look at other challenging and dare I say difficult to decarbonize sectors of our transportation space. And certainly, the aviation world is one that is on the horizon that we think values or merits a level of diligence and some effort by groups like ours and other folks to make sure that we're looking at ways to decarbonize what is a sector that's traditionally been very, very difficult to tackle. And then finally, there's a lot of good waste technology out there, whether it's robotic sortation or in situ real-time monitoring of digesters, but really things that are relegated towards chemical sequestration or destruction of advanced materials, whether that's the MSW stream or garnering more value from food waste in terms of energy production and or soils or compost production. So this is kind of what we're thinking and what gets us excited about the future of this industry. So that's it. Like I said, I deeply appreciate the opportunity to be here today to speak to y'all. I want to give back some time to the remainder of the group because I'm sure there's going to be some questions. I'm seeing the chat box sort of light up. I haven't clicked on it to see the questions, but we're pretty excited at the end to answer whatever thoughts and questions people may have. So thank you again for your time and for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Brian. That was excellent walkthrough of your facility and a lot of the issues surrounding all these different types of organic management. And we do have some great questions coming in that we'll get to after we've heard from Andrew. So let's switch right on. And Andrew, thank you for joining us. And let's, oh, you've got it going. All right, take it away.
I'm hoping so. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. John, thanks for you and your team inviting me to participate. And Brian and Holden did a great job of kind of laying stuff out, so I'll be able to kind of jump through some things so I'm not repeating. As John said, my name's Andrew Castley. I'm the government relations person for Bioenergy DevCo, together with our sister company, BTS Biogas in Europe. We have a little over 25 years of experience in the anaerobic digestion industry with about 250 plants in multiple countries. And because I oversee government relations, my presentation is going to have a legislative slant to it that I hope will generate some questions and maybe some ideas for other states as they start to move forward with the organics diversion process. So let me start with a little bit of background on our facility. Our first facility in the United States, we built in Jessup, Maryland. It's located on the Maryland Food Authority, which is state-owned land. It's a campus of major food processors that are all in one region owned by the state so that they can make sure that that area stays open and running during times of emergency so that we have a viable food supply. Because we're nestled right there in that facility, most of our feedstock comes from our neighbors. We're right next to large processors like, in this picture, you can see the building directly behind our facility is Coastal Sunbelt, Dreyer's Ice Cream, Del Monte, Soft Stuff. There's a lot of food processors in a very tight area. So we were really happy that the state agreed to allow us to lease this land. It's on a little over 5.5 acres, which is what I call an urban model because it's so densely compacted. And on that small site, we process around 110 tons of food residuals or food processing residuals a year. And we produce about enough power for about 7,000 homes annually. So what's our process look like? As the trucks enter our facility, and Holden showed the different types of trucks, the first thing they do is pull on a scale, and when they leave, they pull off on a scale. For obvious reasons, that's so that we can tell the volume that was brought in, but it also allows us a level of security, if you will. You know, some folks just look at us as a organics recycling facility. Some folks look at us as a power plant, but we have to have a level of security that we know the material coming into us is of good quality. So when they enter, we know the time, the date, the driver, the material that was brought in, which will allow us to identify if there's accidental contamination or unfortunately purposeful contamination that we would need to go back to the feed source to address. Once it pulls onto our facility, it goes into an enclosed building, which has a negative air draw so that we can filter that air before it goes out the top of the facility so that we can mitigate any type of odors that might be associated with, and we want to make sure that our neighbors are not offended. The material that comes in, if it's dry, it's dumped onto a tipping floor where it can be, or unloaded, where it can be depackaged and some manual decontamination before it's loaded into one or two hoppers, where it's then processed down to where there's about 5 stages of decontamination throughout the process. But as it's processed, it turns it into, as Holden said, it's like a liquid slurry in preparation for feeding into our tanks for the anaerobic digestion process. What comes out? There's basically 3 byproducts of anaerobic digestion. One that I think is not mentioned very much is we extract the water. Stereotypically, the water that is in food waste right now is either going to the landfill, where it's going to be concentrated in the form of a material called leachate at the bottom of the landfill, or it will be incinerated. By extracting the water, we can turn it into beneficial reuse, depending on the region where we're designing the facility. If it's an arid region where we would need to provide it for irrigation, that can be done, or we can even turn it into potable water if the demand was there. Our facility in Jessup, there's not a great water shortage, so we simply process it at our water treatment facility, and then we hard pipe it down the road to the county's water treatment facility. The methane is extracted, purified, filtered, turned into renewable natural gas. As Brian mentioned, we have a combined heat and power system as well that we use to provide electricity for our facility as well as heat for our digester process. Because we're located directly beside an existing gas infrastructure, we partner with the utilities and we simply pump the material, the gas, the renewable natural gas that we're not using directly into the existing gas line. The remaining product is the digestate is classified as a soil amendment that you can see in the middle, and that is used for soil amendment of agricultural fields for local farmers. So, you know, as you've seen in the other 2 presentations, the science pretty much remains the same. It just depends on the area that you're working. Over in Europe and in some of our rural areas, co-digestion is very popular because there's a large source of animal manure as well as food waste and food processing waste, and it works quite well in the digester. We have developed through a number of processes. We have about 29 international patents that allow us to design facilities and construct them in different regions depending on the food source or the supply source. So our facility in Jessup simply runs off of food waste and food processing waste, which would allow us to construct in highly urban populated areas like New York City or Washington, D.C., where you're not going to find a lot of cows or chickens as feedstock. So we have to be able to operate the technology straight off of food waste and food processing waste. The picture in the middle is our latest facility we recently purchased in Delaware, which is an existing composting facility. Unlike the 5.5 acres that we have in Jessup, we have over 100 acres on this facility, and we're excited that we're going to be able to comprehensively take in multiple feedstocks and, as was previously mentioned, send them in the most appropriate direction, whether this material lends itself to composting or whether it lends itself to digester or a combination of the above. I mean, the goal is across the board 100% organics diversion, making sure all the organics is eliminated from the waste stream. I think it was Holden that showed this earlier, but I like to reference the EPA's hierarchy on food waste diversion. In the diagram, they make a distinction in the AD process. You can see it listed twice. The AD that produces just food waste and food processing waste. The remaining soil amendment is very beneficial for use in agriculture for growing food and things like that. But obviously, if your anaerobic digester is running like human biosolids through it, it's naturally going to have higher levels of pharmaceuticals, heavy metals, PFAS, and those types of things. So we think it's wise that the EPA is making that distinction. And I think you're going to see increased attention given to the viability of the remaining product on what it's useful, whether it's useful for anything or whether it should just be used as possibly a cover over existing landfills. So as was already pointed out, landfills and incineration are while they're the most popular form, they're rapidly falling out of favor for a variety of reasons. It's been said that some studies show that we have about 50 years left of landfill space, but I've seen where 7 states are now reporting that they're going to run out of landfill space within the next 5 years. So since almost half the material going to them is organic, by removing that from and recycling it, it obviously is going to extend the length of the landfill. One of the things that we're seeing as increased intention is land application of food processing waste. There's legislation currently in Maryland. There's actually a bill going on today in Maryland dealing with dissolved air flotation or DAF waste. There's also legislation in Delaware as well as Virginia. So there's going to be increasing attention as to the appropriate processing of the material to have a minimal environmental impact. I always like to use the triple bottom line concept that was coined by William McDonough, who's the author of Cradle to Cradle, and he also wrote a book on upcycle, where he talks about the convergence of really sustainable operations is where environment, social impacts, and the economy are all factored in. And I think that's what we're starting to see also with legislation. On the environment side, with the urgent focus on addressing climate change, we're seeing a whole plethora of environmental legislation or environmental laws that are changing the way that current industry operates. We found that by diverting organics, you can improve the air quality, obviously by recycling the water rather than sending it to the landfill. We can improve water quality, and the remaining digestate, that is a soil amendment, has 2 key benefits in that it decompacts the soil, it allows for greater water retention, and with the increased organic material and microbes for plant health, it just makes sense. On the on the economy side, there's all types of grants that are coming out. There are excellent ways to provide incentives for the new industry, and it will create new jobs. We've also found unintended or things like the war in Ukraine and other overseas conflicts have really made clear the need to onshore or reshore our fertilizer production in the United States. And we're seeing that the material that we can produce is a natural fertilizer that can offset some of the use of chemical fertilizers that are needed in agriculture. And lastly, combining AD with the other forms of renewable energy can provide a steady and reliable source. Since our facilities produce renewable natural gas 24/7, if you combine them with solar and wind that have intermittent power, we can provide a more reliable energy source that is renewable. On the societal impacts, the quickest solution to improve community health is basically to divert organics from the waste stream. And by developing organics recycling facilities, again, we can improve the water, we can improve the soil, and we can improve the air. But I think it's important to mention that when we're looking at environmental justice or social justice considerations, it's important that we look at this industry on comparing it to the existing industry and the improvements that can be made over the existing processes to address some of those the issues that we're seeing. So where's the support? The federal agencies have put out all types of literature and studies that talk about the importance of methane emissions capture. They found that our current, as you know, if you're looking at a landfill, methane capture can be as low as 60%, where if you are consciously diverting the material through an anaerobic digester, you're looking at recovery rates of around 96 to 97%. So it's just a much smarter way of processing it. And that's what the studies are finding at the federal level. The administration is backing that by putting a lot of money towards getting the industry off the ground. The Biden administration has pledged over $300 billion towards addressing it with grants and incentives towards this industry to get up and running. What we're finding is the states are kind of moving forward independently in some cases of like an overarching federal guidance. And so we're seeing kind of a patchwork of legislation that's evolving, and there's different kind of concepts, and you'll see each one is a little bit different, but there is the general overlining goal to divert the organic material from our waste stream. I thought what I would do is kind of use, because we're based in Maryland, I would use Maryland as an example. I pulled a couple pieces of legislation. This isn't all of them, but to give you an idea how states can move forward with getting this up and running. In Maryland, it started in 2017 with a work group that was legislatively created, bringing all the stakeholders together from the composting industry, food diversion industry. Everybody came together to figure out, okay, how can we get this up and running? The next step was to really codify and define the terms that are associated. So in Maryland, we have codified the term organics recycling and an organics recycling facility. And the reason that's important is because it's inclusive of not only anaerobic digesters, but the composting industry, as well as any new technology that comes down the road that allow us to more successfully process organic material. And then once that was in place, then we went forward with a diversion law. And in Maryland, the initial phase of the diversion law said if you make more than 2 tons of food waste per week and you're within 30 miles of an organics recycling facility, you have to, by law, divert to that facility. That is had a step down clause to it, and this year it went down to 1 ton per week. With all those pieces in place, we kind of shifted our attention to how do we find legislation that will support the industry as it continues to grow. So I pulled 2 examples of legislation. One, the top bill requires that all new schools that are built using state funding have to be equipped with organics collection in their cafeterias. So much like you go through a serving line, in the new schools, they'll have a receiving line, and you'll see, any of you that are familiar with the industry know that that's usually kind of this conglomeration of like wooden tables and 5-gallon buckets, and it's kind of a homemade collection process. This law will start to develop that infrastructure, and we're hoping that will expand to other buildings as well. And then lastly, incentivizing procurement of the remaining material. There was legislation that gives government entities the flexibility to procure recycled materials such as recycled topsoil, which is a blend of subgrade soils mixed with soil amendments to make a recycled topsoil for use on state projects. So quickly, I'm going to run through kind of what some of the other states are doing, just to give you an idea that there's a lot of variation from state to state in how they're tackling this issue. For example, in Connecticut, they do 28 tons per year, they don't base it off per week. In Massachusetts, they have a law that does 1 ton per week with no exceptions, where in Maryland we have exceptions that you can provide it, get an exception out of the requirement. In New Jersey, they do 52 tons or more per year. And in Oregon, they actually have a tax credit for any farmer who's willing to donate livestock or unused food to food banks or markets. In Vermont, they have just a flat out food waste ban from any landfill. And in Washington, D.C., Washington State, interestingly enough, they measure by the cubic yards, which is, I found a little bit different. Most places do it by weight, but I just wanted to give you an idea. There's quite a variety of legislative practices that are out there, and we're working at the federal level to hopefully provide some federal guardrails for the states as they move forward. So with that, hopefully I moved through quick enough that we have time for questions. And Brian or John, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. That was a fun rundown of legislation in the area. Real quick, like a sportscaster.
Yeah.
Great. Well, 3 great presentation, lots of information there. So now we're going to take what we've heard through the chat for questions, and I will field them out to all 3 of you. And we'll just spotlight you in the different speakers and let us know if you want to put back up a certain slide or anything. All right, I guess my first question that I'm kind of putting a few questions from folks in the chat together, but you all have different methods of reducing contamination on the front end. Like AgriCycle does a lot of education and outreach at the point of generation. Brian's facility uses a tipping floor to separate. And Andrew, you have a lot of material from sole sources, so you can go right back to the source when you find contamination. Are there any other materials or issues that you are each finding in those 3 different systems, which is causing contamination issues for you? I'll go ahead and start with Holden.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would say in terms of the scope of packaging, like you mentioned, we do have best practices and educate within the framework of the hierarchy to ensure that we're clear that it's always better to recycle materials on site and source separate whenever possible. That said, in terms of materials that we can't accept, but at times we'll have an influx of, or at least get inquiries on, typically we'll divert that to composting facilities because it's typically a coarse material, similar to like oyster shells are a great example of this. Coffee grounds, things that are similar to like wood chips, things of that nature, high carbon materials that are dry, maybe difficult to, or they'll granulate, for example. The only restriction in terms of packaging that we can't accept due to just essentially infrastructure is glass, food packaged in glass. For better or for worse, there's a debate, but a lot of folks have stopped packaging their materials in glass. Anyway, it's hard to transport, it's bulky, it's heavy, breaks easily. So it isn't a huge percentage of the material, but it can cause issues because it granulates, goes through the process and will damage they look like giant fans within the digester and scratch either the walls or the bottoms of the tanks.
How about Andrew or Brian?
I'll
What
jump
do you
in real
find?
quick. I'll take a legislative twist to this. So what we're seeing is an increase in legislation that will help with contamination. Many states are starting to ban like styrofoam serviceware. In some cases, they're legislating biodegradable packaging and things like that. So I think as this industry continues to move forward, contamination is an Achilles heel for us. But as we move forward, we're going to see those numbers fall primarily through new legislation and new technology, automated technology that will allow us to remove the contamination a little bit more effectively. And I'll turn it over to Brian.
Yeah, I'd agree with Andrew and with Holden. I think generally speaking, um, we always try to, particularly with new customers, do as much diligence as we can about the feed source before we begin taking in those types of materials. As Holden said, the coffees, the shellfish, um, disproportionate amounts of seeds or nuts that are inherent in materials. The way that those process are really gritty substrates, which for processes like ours just aren't really conducive to, giving you good longevity on your pumping systems within a digester. So sometimes are a little bit tricky. On the material side, we're very careful with glass. We don't take any glass in our facility, and just really disproportionately high volumes of a vegetable peel or fruit peels, such as lemon peels or orange peels, taking 30, 40 tons at a clip. Uh, that creates a funny reaction in digesters called eliminase inhibition, which you have to be careful with as well. So, I think for us, we're always doing our very best to get pictures or visuals or trial loads of materials before we're committing to those streams long term to make sure that we're not following our downstream process.
Great. All right. Another question is, how do you feel that AD facilities and composting facilities can work together? Obviously, uh, um, we know one of your answers, but yeah, like how is the difference there? Do they complement to each other? Are they uh, competitive with each other? How does that
I'll
work?
jump in on that because I believe Holden was the one, or I forget who said it, but as you're actually, I think it might have been Brian. If you have the benefit, if you have space where you can have a composting facility and a digester side by side, it allows you to take in a large swath of material and decide which goes a better direction. For example, we can process fruit. It has a lot of water to it, and we don't really need water for our process. So if there's a lot of water, we can divert that over to the composting process, which really needs water in order to operate. On the other hand, if we're processing fats, oils, and grease, you could do it through a composter. There's some challenges with it, but those materials give off a lot of gas, and they lend themselves to the digestion process. So it's not one or the other. I really feel like they're both integral parts to allow for the logical processing of all the types of materials. And I'll turn it over to the other gentleman.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew hit it on the head. It's we 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 started out as composters, worked our way into digestion. We just see it as another tool in the tool belt to be able to recycle, materials that might not be suitable for digestion. Those could be coarser or grainer substrates like coffee grounds, like Colton said, or it could also be high nitrogen feedstocks that might not be well suited in a bioreactor environment because of the amount of nitrogen and nitrogen toxicity in digesters is a very real thing. Those materials, may be better relegated to compost or traditional compost when rolling. So it's just we feel they're very complementary. Looking at the European market, that's the way the European market went a decade ago is towards co-locating these types of facilities, and we think it's a good way to do it if you've got the site and if you've got the space to do it. That's always the big caveat.
Yeah, and I certainly don't want to beat a dead horse here, but very in line with those responses. And like I mentioned, there's, as you can kind of see in the photo behind me, we have ample space and do have composting on site in rural Maine. We also operate a composting facility in North Heartland, Vermont, and work with compost sites all across the region. It can be challenging depending on their. I talked about this kind of in the comments, but the unfortunate reality of um, single-use products makes it very difficult when the parameters and infrastructure in certain areas or facilities require source separation and have various levels of tolerance, I guess you'd say, for what they would consider contamination or materials that would require depackaging. So I think in terms of compost versus AD, it's in our perspective, it's compost and AD. There's enough to go around in the material. The outcomes of either process have their place and are both equally as necessary. Soil health, as well as localizing energy, reducing importation of foreign oils, etc. There's pros and cons list to both, but yeah, we view it as a collaborative comparison as opposed to opposing forces.
Great. Well, that kind of leads me to the next question. Is there a difference in cost and in quality of anaerobic digestate versus aerobic compost?
Are you talking about the byproducts of the processes or the
Right.
like disposal rate compared?
Well, she didn't specify, but I believe it's like, is it if you're sending digestate to market or compost to market, is there a significant difference in their quality and how much people are paying for them?
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I don't have anything to share on this because we use all of our digestate ourselves. We don't send it anywhere. So maybe Brian or Andrew can help with that one.
Yeah, I think we do see a value in aerobically stabilized compost. The digestate that we produce is not readily plant available. Particularly the macronutrient nitrogen is not plant available, so it needs to be stabilized and made into a plant available nitrogen form through an aerobically composter process. And when we do that, we find that particularly because of the other materials we're adding to our compost, all natural in structure, we see that nitrogen becomes plant available, but also becomes available over a duration, over about a 6-week duration, particularly during the germination and rooting phases of plant growth. So yes, very much more value in the aerobic side, particularly when it comes to finished compost blends, is what we see.
I can add a brief. One of the things that we see is by combining the systems, anybody who's involved in composting knows that it can be fairly laborious to remove the contamination. There's a lot of manual separation because it's a dry process. Digesting the material first, it's a little bit easier to remove the contamination because it's in a liquid state. So we can have a series of separators that allow us to easily or more efficiently, if you will, with less manual labor, remove that contamination prior to it going to a composting facility. So there's advantages in the partnership.
Good, that those two dovetail together quite well. This question was for Andrew in that you have your sources there in that area coming from food processing folks. Do you feel like your existence and ability to take their material reduces their incentive just to reduce food waste in general?
No, because food sells for more than, I mean, the bottom line is these companies are producing food and they're selling the food. Anything that they can do to mitigate the waste is lowers their bottom line. And so quite oftentimes the materials that we're taking were either materials that were, like Brian gave the example of, we get truckloads of vegetable peels that are, coming from that would not have been a food source for humans, or material that in some way, shape, or form it either fell on the ground or something like that, and they couldn't use it in the process. But I don't think that there's an incentive from industry to say, well, now that we can send it there for recycling, we won't, try to keep our processes as sharp as possible. And I don't want to say that those are our only feedstocks. That's our primary feedstock, but like Brian and Holden, we have a variety. We have the processors, we have the distributors, and then we have the residential market. We take a variety of material from different sources.
That's right. And I see you take post-consumer as well. Um, let's see, this one's for Brian. Have you quantified the methane losses from your digestion process, and is the loss reflected in your numbers? And then I'll also ask the other two, you know, how, are you capturing 100% of the methane, or how does that work?
Well, we're in the business, obviously, of capturing all the methane and generating electricity from that. The economics of a digester really depend on energy generation. These are very capitally intense projects. And unfortunately, you're spending a lot of dollars through the development cycle, through the construction cycle, through the commissioning cycle, and you're not recuperating, those dollars through revenue. And traditionally speaking, and I don't want to profess to say this for Holden or for Andrew, but usually the the economic stack or the revenue stack of a facility is most of the time 50 or 60% disposal fees into your campus, and then the rest of that is energy revenue. So we're very dependent upon energy revenue. So we do take a lot of care in making sure that we are converting all of our molecules of CH4 into combined heat and power into electricity. It's really critical for a facility, and we do take a lot of care in making sure that our CHP has as much uptime as possible, creating as much energy as we can and heat to make sure that we're rounding out sort of the economics of the project. It's really important for a good and stable project and for a good returns scenario for a digester.
I would just reiterate what Brian said. I mean, ultimately, it goes without saying that if you are purposefully, intentionally processing that organics for the collection of the methane, you're going to be far more successful than if you're trying to retrieve it from a landfill. As I said, methane capture at a landfill can be as low as 60%, and our numbers are far superior to that because it is an intentional process versus remediation, if you will.
And that goes to your previous point, Andrew, that even if there is some methane loss, it's much smaller. We're comparing the different ways of handling the material.
I would use the word dramatically.
Dramatically, yes. All right. How about compostable food packaging? For any of the presenters, what has been your experience with compostable food packaging, food serviceware? How do these products work in your systems, if you even accept them?
Yeah, that's certainly a challenging topic for us on the collection side, and it comes up quite often um, as a topic when we work with universities and a lot of like fast casual restaurants, folks who have a lot of takeout, and it's kind of a duality because on one side it shows that there's a community of folks who are motivated, even when there's an additional cost, to do what they feel is the right thing environmentally. I've spent a lot of time diving into the topic and comparing, PLA products versus PET. And, the major takeaway that I try to equip our clients with, and just the general public, is that, single-use materials are single-use materials. And just because it is, corn-based, a corn-based product versus, oil-based, it's still a plastic. And a lot of the times when we're talking about plastic in our environment, unless that unless the PLA based products or compostable products, just by and large, are in a thermophilic environment for a prolonged period of time, arguably the amount of time it takes for that specific brand to break down, it will not break down. So if you are having compostable straw and that ends up in the ocean, that's the comparison I always say, it will remain in the ocean and break down in a similar timeline of a conventional plastic. Same with if it goes on the side of the road. It really needs to be in a thermophilic environment for typically 90 to 120 days for it to break down. So just from like a landfill avoidance standpoint, where it's anaerobic, it is not going to break down in there either. I think it's a very, not to kind of go on a kind of tangent, because I certainly could, but it is a very oftentimes like anthropocentric mindset based on what we can see, which is landfill avoidance, as opposed to, talking about the entire life cycle analysis of a lot of products, including eutrophication, water use, land use, greenhouse gas, etc. And I have a ton of resources, data, and information that I can link in the chat here for folks to dive into the topic on their own as well. Which I'll post that in just a minute.
Excellent point. Anything either of you would like to add to that?
I think Holden said it well, and I'm just looking at what Catherine listed in the chat. I mean, these are single-use items, and trying to switch to reusable containers and reusable materials is always the goal, right? So that's what we advise our partners to do. That's just higher and better use principle in our mind. So
very good point. Yes. Okay. Then let's look at the last end. End markets for digestate or compost. Do you have any trouble finding end markets? And do you have any issues with contamination in the product?
So I'll jump in first. We are working with several different engineered soil companies. There's a lot of design and development, if you will, on engineered soils, everything from green roof medium, growing medium, to recycled topsoil. So that's a fledgling industry as well, I would have to say, in the United States. Most of the green roof medium that is made here in the States, we're sending overseas for use in other countries. But I would say that too is a market that's going to continue to grow. Is there a problem with finding folks that are willing or wanting the material? Not at all. But can you always get can you sell it for what you want? That's a continual challenge. I kind of use the analogy of wooden pallets. If 8 years ago you couldn't get rid of wooden pallets, people were paying to take them, and then somebody figured out how to make furniture out of them and put it on YouTube, and now you can sell wooden pallets for like $5 a piece. We're kind of in that wooden pallet phase where you're going to see it shift to where it's going to become a higher commodity product. But right now, it's still a new industry from my perspective.
How about Brian? Do you have any trouble getting rid of your digestate or compost?
We don't have really any problem, and I think we're in a unique position because we have a legacy 40-year business operating here with many hundreds of customers who have enjoyed our byproducts, our materials for many decades. So for us, it's more of an educational effort in talking to those customers and letting them know, or like soliciting feedback really, and understanding what their needs are as growers or as landscape operators, and making sure that we are designing, our potting soil blends or our compost blends to meet their needs is really what it comes down to. So it just, to Andrew's point, it's not a ready-made market, it's an evolving market. I just think that because we've been operating in this space for a little while, it just comes, maybe a little bit more natural because we've got a captive audience. So it's that's the nice thing about having a business for a little bit longer. That's all.
All right. Well, I'm afraid I can't get to all the questions. Maybe this last one we can do real quick is subsidies. It's about subsidies. Are most 80 build projects subsidized, and would they be viable without such a subsidy?
Is that geared towards the renewable energy industry as a whole, or just us? And, I think we would be naive to say that if you're building a facility and you're not taking advantage of the subsidies, it wouldn't make any sense. I mean, the administration has pledged their commitment to getting this infrastructure up and running by providing grants and incentives. And I think everyone in the industry, just like the solar industry, just like the wind industry, just like every renewable energy industry, it takes a while to get up and running. And so incentives are often integral to getting any industry up and running. I think the automotive industry has proven that concept.
Yes. Okay. Good. Broad, high scope answer for that. We are now out of time. And I really want to thank the three of you for coming and sharing your excellent expertise and your different perspectives. It was a fantastic conversation today. And I'm sorry for participants, we didn't get to all the questions, but we will be putting this on our websites. And at the end, on the presentations, you can have contact information for our presenters today, and can get in contact with them with any lingering questions. So thank you all. And we have a fourth webinar on focusing on environmental justice issues on April 10th. And you can register on our websites, both NUMOA and NERC. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time.